in a fight between a knight and a samurai who would win. Both were products of their feudal system, highly trained in warfare, possessing the best equipment in the lands and adhering to a warrior's code of conduct. But the similarity stopped there. They were built for different kinds of war. One relied on overwhelming force and shock combat. The other mastered speed, precision, and control. A duel between these two warriors represents far more than a simple arena fight. It is a violent collision of two entirely incompatible combat doctrines. And when these two philosophies clash, the outcome may be far more one-sided than anyone expects. When empires decay and anarchy prevails, society defaults to a brutal law of nature, and it is precisely within these dark, fragmented intervals that a specialized class of violence emerges. In Europe, the collapse of the Carolingian Empire left a vacuum. Small, fragmented petty kingdoms broke apart, and power belonged to whoever commanded the most spears. Local lords fought endlessly over single strips of muddy farmland and trade paths. Then, the longships arrived. Viking raiders struck coastal villages and river towns with terrifying speed, vanishing back into the sea before any local commander could mobilize. If a nobleman wanted to protect his estate, he couldn't wait for a royal decree. He needed an immediate, devastating response. He needed his own horsemen. A trained armored horseman could hit with the force of a battering ram, move faster than any raider, and utterly dominate panicked infantry. But maintaining a single warhorse, forging a suit of mail, and dedicating a life to weapons training cost a fortune. A new economic contract had to be written. Rulers carved up their lands, handing estates over to these specialized fighters. In exchange, the warrior swore a blood oath to be the Lord's ultimate protector. The knight was born. They became the military elite because only the wealthiest families could afford the overhead costs of survival. By the 12th century, the life of a knight had become entirely dedicated to warfare. Noble sons were taken from their mothers at age 7 and began their careers as pages, learning courtly manners. From here, they graduated to squires, serving as attendants to an existing knight, and finally, after years of training, earning their spurs through blood. Halfway across the world, a parallel desperation was unfolding in Japan, but the trajectory was entirely different. In the early Heian period, power sat firmly in the capital of Kyoto with the imperial court. But as the government neglected the distant provinces, lawlessness took root. Bandits raided tax convoys, and powerful regional clans realized the emperor's court couldn't save them. To defend their lands, wealthy provincial landowners took up arms. They didn't start as swordsmen but as elite horse archers. They developed a terrifyingly precise discipline. They started riding at a full gallop while firing heavy composite bows. As these provincial military clans grew in strength, they realized the court relied entirely on their muscle. By the late 12th century, the samurai overthrew the political status quo entirely, establishing the Kamakura shogunate. The emperor remained a spiritual figurehead, but real power now sat with the shogun, the supreme military dictator. Centuries later, a catastrophic civil conflict known as the Onin War broke out in 1467, and the scale of warfare exploded. Tens of thousands of conscripted foot soldiers flooded the battlefields. The samurai had to evolve again, shifting from solitary horse archers into heavily armored commanders, tactical officers, and the ultimate arbiters of a fractured nation. Two entirely different cultures, separated by thousands of miles of ocean, arriving at the exact same conclusion. When violence prevails, power belongs to the man who has spent every waking second learning how to win a fight. And by the late 15th century, Both warrior castes were at the pinnacle of their respective military evolutions. In Europe, intensive warfare pushed metallurgy to its absolute limits. Master blacksmiths in Germany and Italy perfected the art of tempering carbon steel, creating the pinnacle of personal defense, full Gothic and Maximilian plate armor. While popular myth paints this armor as a clumsy, immobilizing weight that would cause a man to collapse from heat exhaustion, the reality was a triumph of ergonomics. The 50-pound load was distributed perfectly across the skeletal frame, allowing an elite, lifelong athlete to sprint, vault, and grapple. The knight didn't rely on avoiding the blow. He relied on the absolute certainty that even a direct, crushing strike would fail to pierce his steel defense. At the exact same moment, Japan was consuming itself in the Sengoku Jidai, the Warring States period. Because total warfare was a daily reality, samurai technology underwent a brutal, rapid mutation. The traditional boxy Yoroi armor, designed for the ancient era of aristocratic horse archers, was completely inadequate on a modern battlefield dominated by mass infantry formations and the introduction of European firearms. The samurai adapted by forging Tosei Gosoku, the modern armor. Instead of thousands of individual cord-tied scales that soaked up rain and rotted in the mud, Japanese armorers began utilizing large, solid iron plates, heavily coated in water-resistant lacquer. The breastplates were frequently modeled after European designs, specifically engineered with a central ridge to deflect the high-impact blast of matchlock musket balls. This design was masterfully adapted for Japan's rugged, mountainous terrain and humid climate, offering exceptional ventilation and flexibility. The samurai's defense was not about dodging every strike, but rather utilizing superior mobility to dictate the distance of the fight. This divergence in armor design directly dictated their weaponry. While most of us often imagine the samurai facing his opponent with his legendary katana, the historical reality was different. Slicing motions require a soft, yielding surface. Against slick carbon steel, a katana would simply deflect, dulling or shattering the edge. Instead, on the battlefield of 1500, the samurai wielded the yari, a heavy steel-headed piercing spear, or the brutal kanab, a massive iron-studded war club designed explicitly to smash through armor. Across Europe, the knight utilized an equally devastating application of force, the polyaxe. This weapon combined a crushing hammer, a heavy axe blade, and a top spike onto a single stout wooden shaft. It was a tool engineered not to cut, but to break. The knight understood that against an armored opponent, blood didn't need to be drawn immediately. A single blow of a polyaxe's hammerhead could shatter bones, rupture internal organs, or deliver a severe, debilitating concussion right through the layers of an enemy's helmet. Where the samurai's arsenal required lethal precision to exploit a weakness, the knight's weapons relied on the cold, inescapable physics of blunt force impact. Now, let's bring these two elite warriors together on a single field of battle. Under equal conditions of age, health, and terrain, how does a duel between them actually end? Imagine a coastal plain in the year 1500. A European knight, mounted on his heavy destrier warhorse, surveys the horizon. A sudden whisper through the air shatters the silence. A heavy wood-shafted arrow slams directly into the knight's steel breastplate. It leaves a bright silver scratch, but the arrow deflects and tumbles into the dirt. 100 yards away, a mounted samurai prepares his next shot with a massive yumi bow. While the samurai possesses an equestrian archery discipline unmatched in the West, the physics of 1500 plate armor are like an insurmountable wall. Unlike his predecessor, that struggled through the mud at Agincourt a century earlier, where thousands of arrows disrupted formations and panicked horses, this rider, in a tempered steel harness, is functionally immune to long-range archery. Realizing his quiver is emptying in vain, the samurai drops his bow. He unclips a long yari spear from his saddle, spurs his horse, and charges. The knight braces, lowering his massive 7-foot poleaxe. The collision is instantaneous. The triangular steel head of the yari strikes the knight's cuirass at full gallop. The impact is staggering. The steel tip bites, piercing the outer plate, but it loses all momentum against the dense layer of interlocking chainmail underneath. Before the samurai can recover his weapon, the knight swings the heavy, ashwood shaft of his poleaxe. The curved axe blade catches the samurai's mount cleanly across the chest. The horse collapses, sending the samurai crashing into the dirt. Dazed but fueled by lifetime conditioning, the samurai rolls to his feet. He abandons the spear and draws his primary sidearm, not the katana, but a heavy iron-studded kanab war club. The knight dismounts, drawing his longsword, gripping the hilt with both hands. The samurai lunges, swinging the kanab with terrifying velocity. The knight raises his sword to parry, but the sheer kinetic force of the iron club chips the blade and forces the knight back a step. The samurai follows through, aiming a brutal downward strike at the knight's helmet. The knight doesn't try to block the crushing blow. Instead, he steps into the swing, using his superior bulk to close the distance. The club grazes his shoulder piece, skidding off the fluted steel. Now at point-blank range, the samurai pulls a Yoroi Dishi, the thick, chisel-tipped armor-piercing dagger, from his belt, driving it toward the knight's throat. But the knight's armor leaves no open flesh. The dagger hits the reinforced gorget neck guard, slipping off the steel. The knight changes his grip on his longsword, executing a technique known as half-swording. He places one hand on the hilt and the other directly on the middle of the steel blade, turning the sword into a tight, precise lever for close-quarters wrestling. Using his superior weight and the leverage of his solid steel harness, the knight drives his shoulder into the samurai's chest, throwing him to the ground. He doesn't try to cut through the iron plates of the samurai's armor. Instead, he reverses his longsword, driving the heavy steel pommel of the hilt down like a hammer right onto the samurai's helmet. The concussive force rattles through the lacquer and iron, leaving the warrior semi-conscious. With a final, calculated movement, the knight slides the narrow, rigid tip of his longsword directly into the small open gap beneath the samurai's neck, leaning his entire body weight into the thrust. The fight is over. While the samurai represents one of the most disciplined, precise, and adaptable martial minds in human history, his arsenal was designed for a theater of war that emphasized speed, archery, and firearms. Against the cold, uncompromising physics of an articulated European plate harness, a technology forged specifically to survive a continental arms race of crushing blunt force weapons, the samurai faces a tactical dead end. In the end, technology, more than skill or experience, guaranteed the knight's victory.